Welcome to Community of Hope. It is so good to have you all with us. My name is Jeremy Wike. I'm the senior pastor here, and I'll let you be introduced to my fellow communicator here this morning in just a minute. But I just want to say something after I say thank you to the band, for coming and blessing us. But I just want to remind us of something. God never changes. Amen? It is important that we remind ourselves of this frequently in a world that is constantly changing. And for many of us, the world is changing so fast. It's changing our family relationships. It's changing our jobs, our workplaces, and the way we look at the world. Change is so rapid. It's so forceful at times that some of us, we can almost develop an allergy to change. And we want to resist all change. And I just want to remind us that God never changes. But for you walked in this morning, and change is a constant at our church. You walked in this morning and you saw a new booth. It's not done yet, but that might have been a surprise. It's change. It's something new maybe you weren't expecting. Last week we announced a staff transition, and in a few minutes I'll tell you about trying to add some staff. And change is just one of those things that is constant. A couple of weeks ago we introduced some new language we call our Core 4 language. Lots of change, and I just want to encourage all of us to think about this idea that change in some ways stinks, but in some ways change can be good. And in other ways, we have to accept that change is just inevitable. It is a part of life. Change is there. God never changes. But our mission as a church has not changed. It was given to us by our Lord Jesus. And the language we use is to help lost, broken, wounded people find hope and healing in Jesus. And we never forget that we are among the broken ourselves. And God is continuing to work in us, but we have a mission from God. So we've been in a series of messages. If you've been with us the last couple of weeks or any of them, you know we've been doing an interview style in our series. And our series is called What Freedom Looks Like. What freedom looks like. We use that word freedom a lot, and all of us have different sorts of ideas of what freedom is. And so I just want to illustrate this briefly with you and realize that freedom means a lot of different things. When you're young and you're a child, you can't wait to be a teenager, right? Because that's an amazing time of life. When you're a teenager, what do you want to be? An adult with all the freedoms and all. When you're an adult, listen, let's be honest, what do you want to be? Let's go back to the teenage experience, right? Freedom, if you're a toddler, could probably mean, I wish I had freedom and I didn't have to take that nap. I wish I had the freedom to make my own bedtime, right? When you're a teenager, you're like, I just can't wait till I don't have a curfew anymore. When you're an adult, let's be honest, you're like, can't we go back to the afternoon nap? Right? Change. It's constant. It's inevitable. Some of it we like, some of it we don't. The mission stays the same. And Jesus gave us our marching orders. We've been in a series called What Freedom Looks Like. And this week we're going to talk about the youth, the next generation around us in our own community. Now, our director of youth and children's ministry, Sadie Tuckerman, is sick. She has strep throat. She's not able to be with us. But we had already planned to have two of them up here, so we're just going to have one. I will let you introduce yourself in just a minute. But I want to remind us and review. We're going to start in the same place we started the last few weeks. We're in the Gospel of Luke this year in 2025. We started in Luke chapter 4 when Jesus goes home in the synagogue of Nazareth. We're going to end here leading up until Advent. And this is where we're trying to illustrate what did Jesus mean in real time where we live now. Jesus goes home to the synagogue. Luke chapter 4, beginning in verse 16. It's the verses in the lobby as you came in this morning. You want to put those first verses up there. Jesus goes home. He's an adult. He's ready to do his public ministry. He's going to a worship service much like this one. And in that worship service, there would have been a reading of the scriptures, which would have been the Old Testament. There would have been a scroll. Somebody would have stood up and read it. It was the hometown boys' turn to read the scriptures. And we pick up the encounter that Luke records for us, but this was not just an average, ordinary worship service. This was a unique launching point of the mission of God. Here's what we read, starting in verse 16. Jesus went to Nazareth, where he had been brought up, and on the Sabbath day he went into the synagogue, as was his custom. He stood up to read, and the scroll of the prophet Isaiah was handed to him. Unrolling it, he found the place where it is written, and now he's going to record the words of Isaiah chapter 61 with a verse in verse 58 Luke puts in there for us. Here's what he read from the scriptures from on high, from of old. The Spirit of the Lord is on me, because he has anointed me to proclaim good news to the poor. He has sent me to proclaim freedom for the prisoners and recovery of sight for the blind, to set the oppressed free, to proclaim the year of the Lord's favor. Then Jesus rolled up the scroll, gave it back to the attendant, and sat down. And if that's all that happened, Luke would not have told you about this particular day in the synagogue. But something unique happened to launch the mission of God. We go on. The eyes of everyone in the synagogue were fastened on him. Jesus, verse 21, began by saying to them, "Today, this scripture is fulfilled in your hearing." That because Jesus came, from there on forth, there would be freedom for the prisoners, recovery of sight for the blind. There would be freedom from those who were oppressed. And we're talking about what does that look like, the mandate, the calling that God has given to us, his people, in real time. And so today we want to talk about the youth in our community. And so I'd like you to introduce yourself. First of all, I also want you to say where you went to college. I want you to say that as well. And then tell us what you see from those verses of Jesus.
Hi, my name is Bailee Glass. I am a Grace grad. Woo! Class of 2020. I went to Columbia City High School, so I graduated there in 2017, so I love this community. I am with Youth for Christ. I'm the Whitley County Campus Life lead, and so I have a wide variety of hats that I wear throughout the week. I actually just got back from a youth retreat that I'm volunteering at, so I actually saw some of you guys there, so it's good to see you again. I was just at the first church retreat, so it's good to see you guys again. So they're doing a great job, and they've been worshiping all weekend, so kudos to them for coming back on a Sunday too. But yeah, it's good to be here with you guys and your guys' church today. But yeah, I think this passage is really important, not only for us as adults who know Jesus, or maybe you're seeking Jesus, right? But for our students, because we do see that they're blind, oppressed, and captive, right? And this idea of freedom is something that I wish I had found when I was in high school or middle school. And so it's a privilege and an honor that I get to help students find some of that freedom today. And so in turn, I get to give the best that I can what I wish that I would have had sooner, because finding freedom changed everything, right? And so, yeah, I think this idea of the blind, the captive, oppressed, you want me to go into like who I think those are with our youth maybe? Okay. I think when we look at our young people, right, all of us are in bondage to sin, but I think sin is specific to the individual for like that thing that's really heavy, and really that bondage that is weighing our students down. And so obviously we can name it phones, right, is an issue, but it's not the device itself, but it's what it does, how it distorts the image of God, I think, in our young people, right? And so the thief of comparison, right, is the thief of joy, right, comparison is. And so this idea of students are chronically living in a world of am I enough? How are they perceiving me? Who am I, right? And so these fundamental questions of identity are questions that only God himself can answer for us, right? But we have counterfeit connection. And so if someone's going to tell us the things that we want to hear, or the things that we think we need to hear, then we'll validate that response and take that to heart. And so I think what we're up against when we evaluate the state of our young people, I think sometimes it can feel dark and heavy and gloomy, and where's the hope? But I think I want to encourage you guys to take heart, because I have seen kids go from oppression in their sin, right, held down in shame, and often shame that they know God has set them free from, but they don't know how to get out of it. And when they find that freedom, right, and they're no longer held captive by that, even last night I was having discussions with students, and they're in tears because they're realizing, man, I'm holding on to shame that I know Jesus has set me free from, but there's some part of me that still wants to hang on to it because it feels safe and comfortable, because it's known, right, because it's familiar. And often the unknown territory is walking into areas of growth, but that's hard and requires refining and sanctifying, and often that comes at a cost. And so that's a hard thing for our students sometimes because they feel like they might be doing it alone or that no one else understands. And so the power of vulnerability is one of those things that provides that freedom from that oppression and those self-thoughts and the lies and the half-truths. But yeah, I think our kids are in oppression and are blind, and their eyes aren't open because they see themselves through their lens or through the lens of what other people have to say about them instead of through the lens of Christ, right? And so every time they look at themselves, they see a wrong view of self because they have a wrong view of God. And we all do, right? Like, we don't see God correctly without Jesus. But in Christ, right, when it says our lives are hidden with Christ and God. And so when we know Jesus, we actually know ourselves. And we can learn who we are, truly are, and what Christ has done for us. So I think in an overview, those are kind of like the general statements.
Yeah, that's a lot. And in some ways, Bailee, I'm older than you, and I'm old enough to know, like it was always hard to be a teenager in all of our lifetimes. It's not like it's all of a sudden hard and it was easy before, but it is different. There is an intensification of some things that do make it harder to grow up in this world, that our kids, that they have embedded within their worldview some things that are foreign to those of us who grew up in a little bit of a different world in previous decades. A couple weeks ago, I heard you talk about, you said this phrase that was really profound to me. I'd like you to expand upon it. I hope you don't mind. You distinguish between big T trauma and little t trauma. For the record, that word is overused. Trauma is not that I had to wait 15 minutes at the checkout line at Walmart. That's not trauma. But trauma is real, and there is an intensification, perhaps, or at least a greater awareness of it. What did you mean, and how is that playing into this world in which the youth that are growing up in this world, that are blind, that feel like prisoners, that are like captives? What is their world like that might help some of us that are older understand, like, oh, it is different. It was hard for me, but it might be harder today for them.
Yeah, I think specifically Gen Z, and this is probably changing a little bit with Gen Alpha. So like your middle schoolers are more Gen Alpha, and then high schoolers up is Gen Z. I'm at the top end of that, and so, but this idea that students, right, do experience trauma. Like, we all probably have a point of trauma in our story, right? This like really hard mess. So we talk about mess a lot at Campus Life, this idea of like life is hard and messy and broken because that's the reality of sin. But we also talk about this idea of hope, right? But for some of our students, I think there's this, they feel like they're almost stuck in trauma, that this is like their environment is traumatic. And so over the past couple of months, I've had a lot of conversations, especially with young women, about this idea of, I feel like I can't be myself at home and I can't be myself at school, and I have no place where I am me, even in my faith, right? Because I don't feel welcome at home to practice my faith. I don't feel welcomed at school, and I feel like no one actually knows who I am, right? And so in some sense, that feels like a big T trauma because it's this continual cycle that they're walking in. And it doesn't feel like there's an escape or a safe place to process that trauma. And something that's significant to healing is having spaces to be honest. And so when kids don't feel like they have that escape, what they'll often do is find temporary solutions to escape or to numb out from that trauma, and that actually doesn't provide healing, right? And so the accessibility of technology, of social media, of even streaming services, all this stuff has given kids extreme access to numb out, to escape, to feel better, but actually never be filled. Because to be emptied and never filled, right, isn't biblical, right? This idea of like, yes, we want to get rid of the thoughts and cast our cares on Jesus, right? But if we're never filled with the truth of God's word, those lies will creep back in. And so I think that's, in one aspect, kind of this big T trauma. Also COVID, I know we don't like talking about it sometimes, but it was actually really pivotal because it was coming at a time of middle school for a lot of our students, or at an age where foundational relationships were built, and you start to work those muscles of socialization in a really important time. And so when kids didn't have that, that was actually really hurtful for them, even if they didn't realize it, because the pivotal time where you get to explore and ask good questions and figure out who you are with your friends and with your family, and as you're growing and changing, right, that wasn't in the context of community. And as you guys know, it's in your name, but community of hope, right? This idea of we were made to do life in relationships. And so when that's taken from us, or when it's manufactured, that's really detrimental to our development. And so I think that's something that our kids are up against, and something that has taken some unlearning in order to relearn how to do those things correctly. Because the muscles that they're working right now are probably not the ones that are most successful long term, right? Because connecting over a phone or over text or over Instagram stories and highlight reels and all these things, and even the shallow conversations that students might have, right? Like maybe you're talking to a young person you're like, they won't give me anything. I don't even know what to say, right? They're fine. They're always fine. Nothing's ever wrong, but yet their life's never good, right? But it's hard to be honest and have real conversations when we haven't practiced that and haven't learned how to do that. And so I think that's something that our students are up against.
We meaning them. They have not practiced it, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. That's really good. So we have a generation of some kids that are affected by COVID. They have never practiced healthy, safe interactions. And we older, maybe parents, grandparents, those that love these kids, we don't actually, maybe we're frustrated and we're taking something personal that really isn't personal directed to us. It's somewhat society-wide for them.
Don't be discouraged by that, I would say, right? It can be really hard to connect with a young person, especially when it's like, what do I talk about them with? Because they also speak this whole new language that I literally don't understand, right? And so they started throwing in all these words, and you just feel distant, right? And so sometimes I'm like, I have no idea actually what you're talking about, because they're using 5 new words that I've never heard of until this very moment. And I work with young people every day. And so in some aspects, there's this whole new translation, not just of language in a sense, but of culture, that we have to transcend and build that bridge. And I'm glad that I can be a part of it, right? But I think it's also asking really, really good questions to your young people that you do know, that help them go deeper, right? And set up the environment so they feel safe enough to share, right? And so leading with authenticity of, hey, like my life wasn't easy in high school either. I know it's not exactly the same, but like I understand what it is to have mess and pain, right? But I also understand a God who redeems. And so I think us leading in vulnerability and authenticity and sticking alongside students long term, even when it's hard, is worth it, even when it feels like an uphill battle.
So why are you so passionate about this demographic, this age group, these kids and whatnot? Like what is it in your story that God has particularly shaped you to have a particular passion at this stage of your life for this next generation? Because what you just described for many of us just feels like a bridge too far. This is insurmountable. This is really hard. And yet here you are, and many others that are in the trenches with our students. What is it about your story that can be an encouragement to us that is part of the basis for your passion?
Yeah, I mean, I think, first of all, one of the reasons I wanted to come work in the community is because this is a community that did raise me and did invest in me, right? And so, one, like your investment, whatever level that is, whether that's in the education system, with young people here at this church, with your own neighbor kids, or the young people that you have in your life, right, is a worthwhile investment, even if you don't see the fruit. It does make a difference. And so I think that's part of my story, is that was so vital and important to me coming to know Jesus, that adults set up an environment for me where I was able to fail, ask really good questions, and be heard. And in that, hear the truth of the gospel. But I think also in that time, I was wrestling so much with shame and guilt and fear that I had tried to outdo all of that myself, right? And so this effort of like self-righteousness, which was ultimately a failure, right? Like I couldn't earn my righteousness, but a lot of my story felt too heavy for myself. And so in turn, I thought it was too much for God. And so if I didn't even want to confront some things in my life, how would God want to confront those things and change those things? So I think a lot of our times our kids are held captive by these lies and by these thoughts and by the self-isolation, right? And whatever reason that is, that keeps them from being honest enough to go to God with the things that are hard. And so I didn't go to God with my sin, but instead tried to outdo my sin, right? And perform enough works, right? Because in my head, it was this balance scale that I could just outweigh all the bad, and that I could undo by keeping a check mark of good things, right? And so, but no good grades, no good friendships, none of that was going to get me closer to heaven. It was just going to actually make me more isolated and pull me into more depression and more anxiety because it was all about me. And so I think that's kind of what that freedom is that I was talking about right away, is that I want kids to find what then I didn't find until my senior year into college, and even into early young adulthood, that I'm grateful I have now, but I didn't have then. And I look back and I think, man, if I would have had that freedom even 3 years sooner, how much my life could have changed because of that, right? The impact that I could have had, because there's a kingdom call and a holy calling on our lives, that I could have stepped into that sooner, had I known the freedom that I knew then, and that I know now.
If we would have stopped the tape of your life at some point when you were a young person, when you were perhaps a teenager at whatever point, if we would have stopped the tape, we would have looked at Bailee and been like, oh, another one bites the dust. And we would have looked at these choices and these defense mechanisms and these ways in which we were not going to the true well, which is Jesus, for your sense of identity, all these other things. But you're saying there were still people in your life. There were still mentors. There were still people who were shining the light of Jesus, who were shining the light of something better for you. And it came from lots of different places in the community. And as the story, the tapes rolled on in your life in the middle of your despair, all of a sudden, in God's perfect timing, the light came on in your life. The Spirit of God lit up inside of you, and you realized something. Now you're drawing from all of those seeds that were planted in your life that you they looked like they were not going to grow much of anything of good. And now all of a sudden, those seeds were there for you to draw from, to grow from. Even though there's regret, you can still say, I am a changed person, because when God's timing was right, He opened my eyes, and there were people who had been investing in me who continue to invest in me. And I say all that because that's an encouragement for many of us, parents, grandparents, and others who look at young people. It's easy to stop the tape and be really discouraged, and to think another one bites the dust. And we get angry at the world. We get angry at our culture. We get angry at Apple. We get angry at Google. We get angry at all sorts of other things. And we need to see that God is still in this. He is not done yet. We continue to plant seeds, and in God's perfect timing, God does what only God can do. So with that backdrop there, thinking about ministry to young people, what you do, and a lot of the partnerships, and what does ministry success then look like? Because what ministry success does not look like is a teenager who graduates high school who is well behaved. Doesn't look like the one that shows up to church, that doesn't cuss, that carries their Bible around, that just does all of the right things on the outside. Those are fine in one sense. That's not the metric of success, though, is it? As you think about Luke 4 and those words of Jesus and the reality of the environment our young people are growing up in, feeling like they are imprisoned, feeling like they are blind, feeling like they are just oppressed. What does success look like from a ministry standpoint as older people investing in the next generation, no matter what our role is in our own home, in our neighborhood, in the church, or in other spaces? What does success look like?
Yeah, I really like, and the parable of the sower is so helpful when you're working with anybody who you want to know Jesus. It's this idea of we can't control the soil. We can only control the seeds that we plant, but we can pray that God would prepare tender soil. So that's often my prayer for our young people, right? God, would you make the soil tender so that the seeds that we plant and the seeds that we water would grow deep roots and bear fruit? One hand of what it looks like to have successful ministry, so to speak. YFC, one of our mission goals is this idea of lifelong followers of Jesus, right? Not just kids who carry their Bible around, not just kids who are good citizens. That's all good, right? But this idea that young people would become lifelong followers of Jesus, right? So that they would sit in pews one day, not just simply to absorb and hear information and do nothing about it, but that they would become missional disciples wherever they're called. And so that's my heart too, right? But I think this idea of success, right? For some kids, we spend 3 years undoing the lies that they've believed, right? That we break off those shackles and those chains. And it's, no, that's not who you are. No, that's not reality. No, that's not actually who Jesus is, right? And so you spend a lot of the time sometimes just undoing and pulling out the weeds that are trying to take over the good seeds that are being planted, right? Because the garden is so full of weeds that this good fruit can't come up. And so we spend a lot of time just tending and digging, and that hurts, right? And a lot of the times it's the same arguments and conversations of, well, I don't want to believe that, right? Or how can that be true, right? Or this almost doubt. And so we spend a lot of the time helping kids understand who they are in Jesus. And that often starts with this idea of this is who you aren't, right? That you aren't what's happened to you. And what that actually does is it provides a lot of self-forgiveness when they realize how much God has forgiven them. And often those two things go together, right? The more you realize God has forgiven you, the more you forgive yourself, right? And are able to walk in the reality of the gospel. And so that's kind of this one idea of the chains. I think with this idea of being blinded, a lot of the times, like the scales on our eyes, right, is when the one story of the guy who had needed his eyes washed twice. I think this idea of sometimes it's multiple times that we have to go back every day to see ourselves rightly. And so with our young people, sometimes they can talk kindly about other people, but not about themselves, right? It's easier to see other people, how God made them, but they don't see God's image in themselves. And so something that we get to do is help restore the image of God in people by speaking the reality of who God is and how he has made them. And so anywhere from wrestling with sexual identity, pornography, these really hard and heavy things that students are facing, right? But restoring the image of God, Jesus does that, and we get to be shepherds and participants in that, right? And speaking the truth of who God is. And so I also think with the year of Jubilee, this idea of the year of the Lord's favor, right? The reality that we live in the kingdom now. So the 50th year is the year of Jubilee in the Old Testament. So Isaiah was referencing that. For us, it's our reality of the kingdom come now. And so this idea of part of it was also the resting of the soil. And so I think this idea of students want to be at rest. They want to be at peace. That's what freedom looks like sometimes. It's not about being able to do everything, but also having permission to not do anything but abiding, right? That our students don't have to strive. They don't have to keep seeking for new experiences, right? But they're simply allowed and called and commissioned to rest, right? To seek the Lord, to know that he is a good shepherd, right? To be led by him along paths of righteousness, right? That is a gift and a privilege for a young person to know, hey, it's okay. You can stop striving, right? That your performance won't get you any closer to Jesus, and he can't love you any more than he does right now. That is a gift and a blessing when we can give that to our young people and show them and not just tell them that, right? But give them permission to fail, to not be perfect, to find hope and freedom in that. And so I think this Jubilee, this year, this ultimate freedom for kids, one, the gospel is incredibly personal. And so the way that we experience freedom is incredibly personal in Jesus, but it's also this general grace, right? And so we all know what the gospel is, but the way that it impacts and influences our lives is made more real and evident when we're honest about the things that God has healed. And so I think for a lot of our kids, it's also getting to the point of, I need you to be radically honest about your story, because then you're going to know and taste and see how good God is, right? Because you know how hard it is to not have life with him. But when you've experienced death to life with Jesus, that changes everything, right? And when you know how good that tastes, you hunger and thirst for it.
Bailee, as you talk about restoring this sense of stop believing the lies, start living into our identity as image bearers, created in the image of God, and spending time just dismantling those things. I'm reminded that we adults need that in our lives too. It's really easy. And I'm a dad, and so I fight this myself. It's easy to focus on how we need to help change them. And you just said something really, really powerful. We don't just tell them what they need to do, but we have to show them something ourselves, and we have to do the hard work in our own hearts and our own lives, and we have to be abiding in Jesus ourselves. That might be abiding in Jesus for a parent or a grandparent or a youth worker or those that rub up against kids. That might be the greatest gift we could ever give them, is that we would model something for them that is good and that is an alternative to all of the other fake cheap substitutes on tap in our culture. And I think that was really profound, that it's not just them, not just the lies they believe, but it's the lies we believe too. It's the things that God needs to strip away from us and our own hearts, and to be the vulnerable piece that you talked about. Being vulnerable, I have to be vulnerable and acknowledge that I'm still in process, that I'm still on a journey, that God is still at work in me. And there are things in my life that I've really struggled with, and I thought they would just go away, and they haven't gone away. And that's all part of it. And that's something that is magnetic to young people. It doesn't push them away when you talk about your own struggles. It actually often draws them near. But for many, depending on your generation, your family of origin, or whatnot, for many of us, that is so hard. It is so unnatural. And yet, you're giving us an invitation to see the world differently, to see our young people differently, to see our own spiritual formation differently, and to take a long view and to learn to journey with young people, not as the teachers all the time, not as the ones who have it who have it perfected, or we have it figured out and we will tell you, teach you what you need to do, but as fellow journeyers who are on journey with Jesus, inviting others to come on this journey. So you made a phrase a couple weeks ago. You talked about this phrase. Maybe you can unpack it a little bit. You said that we invite students to come to the table, which is a really powerful image and metaphor. We understand hospitality. We understand the kind of intimacy that can happen at a table with a dinner and a shared meal. And there's just something different about that environment as opposed to an environment where we're all in rows and there's only one person talking. How is that different? What does that unpack that for us as we think about journeying with students and seeing God do amazing things in them through us, and God doing amazing things in us through them?
Yeah, God has taught me so much. Probably I've learned more from students than I've probably taught them. Right? This idea of when we journey with people and we journey with Jesus together, right? We're often sanctified and refined in that process. I think of this table imagery, and it's something that I just really value. And this idea of coming to a table, it's like probably one of my favorite pictures when I just think about it in my head. And this idea of the banquet table, right? And so our eternal dwelling is with God and the Lamb's Supper, and we're all together, right? There's no fear and there's no shame. And there's this idea of we're fully known and fully loved. Something powerful about a table is it gets everyone on the same level. And so there's no sense of power or authority when you're at a table, right? Everyone's at the same level. And what that does for a young person, one, is it helps them breathe a little deeper. Okay, like I'm not being yelled at right now. Like this isn't a place of confrontation of like, you hate me, right? Like it immediately takes some of those, I think, guards that we put up, and it lowers them down. And so there's even something powerful about physical spaces that we create for the young people we interact with. What it also does is it naturally then fosters a conversation that is an actual conversation and not just a monologue, right? And so your students probably don't need preached at, but they do need listened to. And so it's okay to not have the answers, right? Sometimes it's like, I don't know what I'm up against, and so I don't know how I can help. Right? But if we can ask really, really good questions, intentional questions, the secondary level questions, right? So you say you're fine, you say you're tired, like physically tired, because like you slept 10 hours, right? So what's actually going on, right? Going deeper with your students, and that often requires you to be willing to go deep also and be vulnerable. That's the power of authenticity, right? Is when we give ourselves permission to not be perfect, it also gives the person across from us permission to not be perfect. And so, yes, come to the table with your young people. We do that on a Monday night because one, food is fun and kids love to eat, but what it also does is creates fellowship, right? And it gives kids an opportunity to be honest. And so I've seen it in real time, but I also know the power that it's had and how much when I look back on my childhood, when we had family dinners at a table, that was so much more significant than when we had family dinners in the living room. right? And we were all on the couch watching the TV or on our phones or whatnot. But when we came to the table, that was us. And that was an invitation of, hey, at this table, we're together, right? And we're in this together, and this is a team. I think sometimes we look and it's like us versus the young people, or all the young people are like versus each other, right? Or there's just this versus mentality. The reality is we're not up against flesh and blood, right? But against powers and principalities, right? And spiritual forces that are so much bigger than you and I, right? And so I think what our young people need is a partnership and a teamwork and say, hey, I know there are problems. I know there are struggles. Can we face them together, right? Hey, I'm in your corner. And even as an adult, I need to hear that, right? Like that the things of this world that feel heavy and feel hard, I'm not facing them alone, right? And so this invitation of being at the table gives us permission to be honest. It gives us permission to have really good, healthy conversations, to be slow to speak, slow to anger, and quick to listen. But it also gives us permission, right, to invite God to do what only He can do because we leave a seat at the table for Him. And so we give God permission to teach us and refine us and shape us. And there's beautiful things that happen, right? And so maybe it's not always a physical table, right? But I think there's great benefit in it. But if we can sit across from a young person and say, hey, we're in this together, and I'm journeying with Jesus, like I'm on the way, right? And I want to go on the way with you, like following after Jesus, the living God. And there's immense beauty and power in that when you know you're not alone. And so, yeah, I would say invite people to the table, your neighbors. Like radical hospitality in that way is a really good thing to practice. Even if you don't have a lot to offer, your honesty and your authenticity and your journey and experience with Jesus is incredibly worthwhile and important for the kingdom and important for the church.
Yeah, so this is a big week for Youth for Christ, YFC. It's We Believe in Youth. Do you want to tell us a little bit about the campaign? Because as talking to you and Dana Neuenschwander, part of this church, and also a staff member, it's a really big week just to promote this idea that we need to invest in the next generation. It transcends any one particular church, any one particular nonprofit. It's kind of a call for all hands on deck in the community. Tell us a little bit about it and how people might be able to participate in that.
Yeah, this is our 6th year of We Believe in Youth, WBIY. And it started out of COVID, this idea of, hey, we have kids who need connection, right? And we want to get our community behind them when they're feeling incredibly more isolated than they ever have. And so that was kind of the roots of it. And it still continues today because we've seen great success in this idea of when a young person hears face to face the words, I see you, I hear you, I love you, and I believe in you, that's immensely valuable. Right? And those are words that can actually undo a lot of the things that we've heard, right? And a lot of the lies that we've believed when they come from a person that we trust and that is real and honest with us. And so this idea of our words matter, our words shape our futures, and they also heal our past. Also, this idea of showing up for somebody is incredibly significant. I think the best gift you can give a young person is your time, your attention, you showing up and supporting them, not only in their wins, but also in their losses, right? So I think of, yes, there's value in going to a basketball game or a volleyball game or whatever and cheering on the sideline for your kid or for a student or a young person you know, but there's also incredible power in walking with a young person who is grieving or walking with a young person who has just had a breakup, right? And you're like, this is teenage love, I don't even get it, but it was worth it, right, to walk with them, and it had value. Right, and it has significance. And so the power of showing up, that's what we get to do this week, is call our community to that, right? And so it's this co-commissioning, this co-effort, right? All hands on deck approach of we want every young person in our community, in Whitley County, in Columbia City, in Cherubusco, in South Whitley, wherever it is, to know that they are loved, seen, and believed in, right? And that they hear it personally from us, not from up front, not from a mass video, right? Or an email or whatever it is, right? But from a face-to-face connection with an adult who knows them. Even if you don't know their whole story, if you can see them for just a moment and look them in the eyes, that has immense value and power. And so We Believe in Youth is this idea of we, all of us, the church, the community, we believe in young people. We believe in them. We believe in their future. We believe there's hope for their story. We believe that God's not done with them yet. And it's okay that they're a work in progress because we're going to keep journeying with them. And so there's kind of two folds. That one aspect of this All Out, We Believe in You, this coming alongside young people, and then it's also a fundraiser for us for YFC, and so it does support our mission and the work that we get to do. But my heartbeat behind it is, yes, this idea of that our community would be called to do what God has already invited us to do for hundreds of years, right? This work of loving God and loving people and seeing our neighbor the way that God sees them, right? Made in the image of God, and valuing our young people and speaking life into their stories.
So what are the things that, as we wrap up, what are the things that every single person that is here that perhaps is an adult, they have some kind of proximity to a young person or young people, what are the things that every one of them can do with regard to the young people to which they have proximity in their lives?
Yeah, if it's helpful for you, I'd make a list. I'd write down their names, and I'd write down like a couple fun things about them, if you know something about them, right? If you know, for example, their favorite candy or their favorite color or something like that, and there's ways that you could bless them this week or throughout this year with just a small, hey, I see you thing, that's important for a kid, right? Not just that our words say it, but that our actions display it. The thing I'd encourage you to most is prayer. Prayer changes things, and it changes young people. And so pray for the young people you know, especially if you're frustrated for them and like with them, and it feels like an uphill battle. Pray. Pray that there would be tender soil for the seeds that are being planted and have been planted to fall in good soil, for roots to grow deep, and for people to come alongside you and help you water. Like, we are in this together. It's not just you up against your young person and up against whatever they're doing, right? It's you and your young person up against a spiritual battle, right? And we're in this together as the church. And so I would say take heart. But yeah, so I would say name the students in your life and a couple fun things about them if you can. Pray for them. And then find one way that you can bless them, either with your words and or with actions this week. And so is there a handwritten card you can give them? I actually have some if you want one. Can you take them out to coffee, right? And buy them their coffee? Can you take them out to breakfast? Can you call them? I know they might not answer, but can you call them? Or leave a voicemail and tell them to call you back, something, right? Or can you go support them at their activities, right? But this idea of you going and even doing something above and beyond what you normally do, maybe you're already really connected with the young people in your life. Is there some way that you can bless them or intentionally care for them and let them know that they're seen and believed in, and that they're loved? And speak God's story over them. Speak the gospel over your young people, right? That is powerful, and it has effect, right? And so do that, and be bold in that. But also ask really good questions and listen so you can get to the heart of what they need, and hear that. And so, yeah, I would say make extra time to just be extra aware. And so sometimes it's like, oh my gosh, I have to like do all these things. I never want you to feel burdened that you have to do more. But this idea of missional discipleship is the places of where God has called you, be faithful in those spaces. And something I was taught, actually at Grace, shout out, was this idea of see the room, see the need, meet the need. And so as you're going, see the room. What's going on? Who are the young people here? What's the need? See it, and then meet it. And if you can't, find somebody who can, right? But be intentional in the spaces that God has already called you to and the relationships that he's already put in front of you. And I think we'll see God do miracles within that.
Love that. Bailee, you brought some resources that'll be down in our resource center, and people can chat with you afterwards here between the services. But would you give Bailee Glass a round of applause? Thanks for joining us.